We're going to get started if everybody would please quiet down. Thank you. Mr. Matursky, please go ahead.
On behalf of the Korea Cold War families and missing, I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to testify here today. The Korea Cold War families and missing fully supports any and all of the changes recommended by the current DASD of DPMO, Ambassador Charles Ray, that would dramatically alter the structure of the POW MIA community and thereby increase its capabilities to identify 180 sets of remains annually for all wars combined. This would represent an increase in identifications of 150% per year. The DASD recommends that the lab be moved to the mainland because of the serious ongoing short staffing problems that the lab has never been able to overcome located in Hawaii. A study requested by OSD DPMO to address the moving of the JPAC lab is currently being conducted by the Institute for Defense Analysis, and its results will be available in the next 45 days. The move to the mainland will allow the JPAC lab to acquire a level of professionalism that has greatly lacked for years, which is necessary to reach the DASD's goal of 180 identifications annually for all wars. To complement this effort, the DASD has written a new policy paper that redefines the strategy of how to make the best use of all of the government's assets used in the recovery and identification of remains. This policy paper is currently available on the DPMO website. There's also a DPMO paper which should be available shortly, detailing by percentages how the assets of DPMO JPAC should be used based on today's realities for each of the past conflicts. To ensure that the goal of 180 identifications take place, we recommend that JPAC be removed from the oversight command of PACOM and that oversight be returned to Army Casualty. PACOM, a warfighting command, has shown little to no interest in performance levels at JPAC. It has appointed incompetent military commanders and allows equally incompetent civilian commanders to run JPAC. We further recommend that the current and future DASD at DPMO be placed in unqualified command of the entire U.S. government commitment to this highest of humanitarian missions, the fullest possible accounting of all POWs from all wars, past, present, and future. DPMO is fully capable of overseeing all aspects of this mission, since it is its only mission. If these changes are implemented, the Korean War families will finally have what they've long been lacking: an identification team working full-time on the 853 unknowns buried at the Punch Bowl Cemetery in Hawaii, where with recent advances in scientific identification has been determined that as many as 400 of these unknowns could be identified. A forensic team working full-time on the 540 sets of remains from the Korean War that have been warehoused at JPAC mostly since 1993. A full-time investigative and recovery team working in South Korea instead of the limited number of operations we have now due to the serious lack of qualified personnel at JPAC. This team should also be there to work with the South Korean version of JPAC, known as MACRI, to ensure that no U.S. remains recovered are accidentally disposed of as they have been in the past. A fully staffed JPAC will allow recovery operations to be conducted in North Korea and also in South Korea, not as in the past an either-or situation. Currently, JPAC defines this as an either-or situation as they continue to cover up its serious lack of personnel with a meaningless study of their own.
Thank you.
I'm also asked to make a statement.
One last statement.
By Irene Mander, President of the Korea Cold War Families and Missing, regarding a meeting with Admiral Crisp on April 4th, 2008 in her offices in Hawaii, accompanied by 4 members of her organization, with Johnny Webb, the senior civilian of JPAC, was in attendance. The most important issue to discuss was the moving of the JPAC lab to the mainland that the Admiral was aware of. When this issue was raised, she immediately said she was doing this study. But in actuality, 4 months later, it was found out she was not doing the study.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
President. The Admiral has never explained or apologized for this. And is this any way to run a business?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And of course, your whole statement is in the record. Ms. Bissing.
Hi. Chairwoman Davis and distinguished members of the House Armed Services Subcommittee for Military Personnel, thank you so much for having this hearing today and affording me the opportunity to be the voice of many family members my organization represents. We who are family members and friends and comrades all share one thing in common. That is, we wait for the day that we can bring our missing loved ones and friends home. We want to understand what has truly happened to them. These unanswered questions haunt us. Birthdays, anniversaries, special days, all are lived with emptiness and questions of what truly happened to the ones we love and miss. With me today, I bring a picture of my uncle, William Charles Bradley. He served with the Army during the Korean War, and he was a medic. He was first listed as killed in action on December 1st in the area of Kunuri in Unsan County in North Korea. Through years of research by the analysts at DPMO, with the help of my dear friend and colleague, John Zimmerly, my family learned that he was actually a POW and died on a march route towards a holding camp. Now, we can ask that when negotiations resume in North Korea, that this specific area be researched. It is so important to truly know what happens to our missing so that we can move forward. His remains are still in North Korea, waiting to be returned home. Like many, he is homesick in Korea. Having served as president of the Coalition of Families for over 5 years, I have received a lot of suggestions of what can be accomplished to make the process work a little better. We strongly support and endorse plans to construct the new facility for the accounting process in Hawaii by JPAC. We believe that this will facilitate a reduction in the time of identification and thus speed the return of remains and much awaited information to the families. On a related point, we do not support relocation of this activity to Kaunas. The current location is ideal, being in the proximity where the majority of recoveries actually take place. A move would also hamper that very important international partnership with the South Korean forensic team, which benefits our recovery process. Additionally, the cost of such a move in these times of financial strife makes no sense at all from the view of the concerned taxpayer. There's a critical need also to have access to files that still are held as classified for over 50 years in the NORA at College Park. A press release dated March 11, 2009 notes that President Obama has approved a $459 million budget for the National Archives. $1 million of those dollars has been allocated solely for the development of a new Office of Government Information Services created by a 2007 amendment to the Freedom of Information Act. It will monitor compliance of federal agencies and ensure that the records of governments remain open and accessible to the public. We ask that you also support House Resolution 111, as we believe it will aid in the much-needed assistance in the accounting process.
Ms. Passine, your time is up. I think that we'll have an opportunity to get back to some of your other issues. Thank you very much. And Mr. Broward, please proceed.
Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. Turf wars, bureaucratic sabotage, and unethical behavior on part of a few continue to exist in the POW-MIA mission. To have a complete account of what the mission needs would require department managers of JPAC to testify under oath before your committee. They know the problems that exist and have excellent ideas to correct those problems. For several years, we have advocated for a strong central authority to manage the agencies involved in the U.S. government POW-MIA program. Ambassador Ray has worked very hard to make the mission more effective. The merging of Joint Task Force Full Accounting and the Central Identification Lab in 2003 was a good move, but has led to some unanticipated consequences that need remediation. Please refer to a DPMO draft report in response to the Senate Armed Services Committee Report 109-254. This DPMO draft report was completely ignored by JPAC and PACOM when the final report was drafted and sent by DOD to the Senate Armed Services Committee. Both of these reports are attached to my statement. These two documents tell the problems that exist within the current structure. In fairness to Admiral Crisp, she was not the JPAC commander in 2007 when the final report was sent to the Senate Armed Services Committee. The draft DPMO report in just 4 pages addresses the problems that exist and ways DPMO was considering to correct those problems. Since 2004, there have been 364 identifications, or 73 per year. This means it takes 7 staff members working full-time for 1 year to make 1 identification. During this time, 65% of recoveries and identifications were from World War II and Korea, yet 75 to 80% of resources were devoted to Southeast Asia. In the SIL, there are 1,433 unknown remains. For several years, we advocated for a more effective outreach program for obtaining family reference evidence, mitochondrial DNA. The Defense Science Board report of 1995 recommended an aggressive outreach program which could be used today, but this report has not been accepted. Finally, in June 2008, I went to the Joint Chiefs of Staff for help. The Joint Chiefs of Staff directed that a plan be developed, but as of this date, 9 months later, no plan has been developed either by the service casualty officers or DPMO. In 2003, we presented a plan to JPAC for the possibility of associating MIAs to unknowns and turning in the punch bowl. In 2004, Dr. Hall, the SIL director, saw merit in the plan and hired a forensic anthropologist in early 2005 to work on the plan. A historian was to be hired, but there were no funds to do so. Since that time, there have been 7 exhumations, 6 have been identified, and 1 is pending DNA processing.
Could you wind up your statement? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes. 25 additional possible associations of MIAs to unknowns in the punch bowl have passed the preliminary dental screening. Yet, this is the research that I do, yet there's only been 2 exhumations in the last 2 years. And it's not the part of the laboratory, it's critical shortage of forensic anthropologists and professional historians.
Okay. Thank you very much. I certainly appreciate all of your the testimony here and your statements. I know it represents tremendous background on your parts, and it's very difficult to condense that in a few minutes, but as you can tell by the size of the panel, I think we're going to have an opportunity to get to some of the issues that are important to you, but more than that, we really want to try and think about where we go from here, and that's going to be the focus, I think, of a lot of our questions. I wanted to just ask that we all welcome and ask unanimous consent that Ms. Kilroy be allowed to participate in the hearing today. Hearing no opposition, and also unanimous consent that the statements of Mr. Hall, Mr. Phillips, Mr. Tenney, and Mr. Jones also be submitted to the record. Thank you. Many of you have touched on the organizational structure of the PIA community and the problems that you see with that. Some of you have stated the problems, others have additional concerns about the ability to move through and work as efficiently as possible under that structure. If you could talk to us a little bit about what you see as bringing the POW MIA community under one formal structure instead of the current structure that we have with several entities that play a role in this but don't necessarily have the ability to do the work that you see that's required. What are some of those issues? What do you see as some of the downsides as well to that kind of restructuring?
I want to. Well, I think it would be the worst possible time to consolidate this all in Washington, D.C. under the Defense POWMI office. First of all, it's at too low level. But secondly, I've never, in all my 30 years as executive director and umpteen trips to the field with the operators who are conducting the missions there, I have never yet seen as high an operational professionalism supported by tremendous assets and resources. Not enough. And that is exactly the wrong thing to do is to have a political-based organization that is supposed to be policy guidance and oversight handling operations that Admiral Keating, the current PACOM commander, has been very supportive of in all his testimony to the House and to the Senate. And yes, there are budget problems with that, and that is the reason that I was suggesting at least a one-third plus up in JPAC's budget, but to ensure that increasing anything in Southeast Asia in no way jeopardizes anything on World War II, Korea War, Cold War. We need to increase, not have one set of circumstances in competition with another, but under no circumstances bringing operations into Washington, D.C. to cost more and charge more in terms of bureaucracy.
Let me see if anybody else wants to respond to that. I think there are differences. Mr. Matursky.
Yeah, there's serious differences. Obviously, I wouldn't have any problem if 75 to 80% of the assets were being directed in my, in what I advocate. Then would be great. But the problem is, no matter how much money you throw at JPAC, how many buildings you put up, they do not have the table of organization that they're supposed to have. And to that end, they've never provided anyone, when it was requested, a table of organization to show you what their level of personnel is. They cannot, what I mentioned in my statement, they can't do the job because they don't have the personnel. I don't care how much money you want and who you put in command. If you don't have the personnel, it's meaningless. And structured in Hawaii, it'll never do justice for World War II, Korea, Cold War. Yeah, there's a narrow political and personal agenda which is directed in one area. And that's what has just been testified to. But if you don't make those structural changes and in command, Admiral Keating didn't even know who Johnny Webb was, who's supposed to be the senior civilian commander at JPAC. Mm-hmm. And if someone in this panel can testify to that.
I can tell we're not going to have no, I understand that there are real differences coming out of your experiences. Would anybody else like to weigh in? And any thoughts? I mean, how do you see really resolving some of these questions?
I think it's important to understand it all started with the Vietnam War. If it wasn't for the Vietnam War, we wouldn't have the organization, the personnel, and the assets and resources devoted that are today. They have not been plussed up in personnel and funding to the extent that they are expected and should pursue answers on the other wars. Frank is absolutely right. There are inadequate numbers of personnel and funding for the expanded mission. If Congress and the American people are going to expect more from Joint POW Accounting Command and its lab, the first thing they need to do is plus up personnel and plus up funding. And right in my little abbreviated statement, we talked about forensics anthropologists. You can't do any of it, field or lab, without increasing that element.
Yes, I wanted to...
There's one serious deficiency in that argument. You're not going to get the people working in Hawaii. They have been leaving Hawaii on a consistent basis. So why would you want to fund up something in a location that will never be fully staffed with professional personnel to properly do the job?
I want to make sure I turn to anybody else who would like to comment on this issue. Yes, Ms. Piacine.
I think what's important here is to focus on how, again, we can make this a better situation and really do what is necessary for the accounting effort. I think that we really need to also look at the most current progress that JPAC has made. My understanding is not that they are losing anthropologists right and left. I think currently they've set up a college there and are actually retaining people. So I think whenever the JPAC folks come in, I think that those questions need to be asked.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Brower.
On that same
and I know my time is up, but if everybody doesn't mind, if we could try and hear from everybody, that would be great. Mr. Brower.
Thanks. When we first went to JPAC about 8 years ago, they had 36 anthropologists. Today, they're down to 19. We've been going there about 100 days a year doing research. To keep forensic anthropologists there, I don't think it's possible because the attrition of them coming back to the mainland to be with their colleagues and for better jobs is just going to happen. The first thing that you asked was, how how can you make these agencies work with 3 different commanders? That's virtually impossible. You need somebody in charge. You have a 4-star, a 2-star, and then Ambassador Ray. Ambassador Ray makes the policy, but to get JPAC to carry that policy out, when there's a 4-star in charge, that's virtually impossible. We've observed over the years. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. I'm going to go on to Mr. Wilson now. Was there anybody who really wanted to weigh in?
I just wanted to weigh in that I think, the military can figure things out when they actually do look at what is the mission and what requirements need to be put to it. But there are problems of turf. And so what I'd ask for is that you look at how you do that and have a good study done of it, which really will match the resources to the identified requirements and structure it that way. It hasn't been done in ages.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
We can, the VFW doesn't subscribe to the theory or the position of moving everything to the mainland. When over 90% of the investigative and recovery operations for all wars are in the Pacific region. That's just one addition to, and I agree with Ann Mills Griffiths on her statements also.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to Mr. Wilson.
Thank you very much, and thank each of you for your dedication. It's very impressive to me on behalf of our veterans and our persons who haven't returned, how dedicated you are. A question for each of you. You have made several recommendations on how the personnel accounting process should be improved. Going back to my opening statement, I believe we must make changes in the personnel accounting system that will dramatically increase the number of annual identifications by a factor of 3 to 5. Achieving this goal would mean an annual identification. These annual identifications would go from 76 per year to 230 to 380 per year. If that significant increase in identifications became one of the goals of the personnel accounting process, what are the 2 or 3 most important changes beyond the obvious need for more people and resources to the status quo that you believe would have to be made?
I think some of the steps that Admiral Crisp has been taking, and someone just alluded to, the new JPAC Academy that Dr. Bob Mann is leading. It is in Hawaii, and Admiral Crisp has developed several programs for recruiting recent graduates in forensics anthropology, for compensation, for education. You'll have to ask her all the details. What I know is that in my many trips out to talk with the anthropologists, including the younger generation, new recruited anthropologists, the people out in the field, there were 5 that we talked to just on this one trip when we went out to the field in Laos, 4 or 5. But they love their jobs, love deploying to the field. Now, yes, they shouldn't have to deploy as much as they do, and yes, we need more anthropologists and other odontologists, different kinds of scientists to participate in these things. They don't all have to be PhDs. But this new JPAC Academy, therefore, including exchanges with a Thai university in Khon Kaen, they're going to be getting constructive credit. They're developing all kinds of imaginative solutions for getting more anthropologists into the program and for advancement within that program to expand their numbers. So that's all, to me, very positive. And I think that absolutely is crucial to the identification process. In fact, the League supports additional laboratories that would be devoted solely to, and some of those could be in the continental U.S., adjunct labs to focus strictly on identification of remains, not deployable assets that do all the field work, but strictly focus, and that could be in an addendum to the existing laboratory structure, but so long as they are under the Joint POW Accounting Command, so that they don't become politicized or controlled by policy ups and downs in the community, but in fact continue to focus on the work at hand.
Number one thing I believe that can be done is you have to professionalize the staff. You need more professional historians. You need more forensic anthropologists. The reason that these fellows aren't being worked on, or right it's being done and exhumed, is because there's not the staff there to do it, either professional historians or anthropologists. It's a shame. Some of these go back over 2 years. They've been approved by an odontologist. Let's get them out of the ground. They still sit, and I think that's a really disservice to the youngsters missing. In regard to funding, I don't think you need to increase the funding. You just need to professionalize the staff. There's so many people that work there. They have, I think, 66 analysts, and I really don't know what the analysts do. They're good people. I like them. But who gets the job done is either a professional historian or forensic anthropologist. That's where the identifications come from. The historians tell you where to go to find remains. Thank you.
Yes.
I would say one other thing to look at is, is the diplomatic piece. Who can really influence the countries that we need to influence and make the arrangements and the coordinations? I think we have to look at that piece and look at it hard.
And aside from the obvious problem of dealing with DPRK, which other countries do you think we need to work with more closely?
I'll defer to Ann on that.
Well, clearly we need to focus at a higher level as we did in earlier years. I don't know that we even have. I've been gone for 2 weeks to Asia, but Assistant Secretary, that level of intervention on this issue in all the countries, including Russia, North Korea obviously is a problem, but Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, but it needs to be engagement on a humanitarian basis regardless of all the political and other issues, to push for the kind of priority by those governments to give what they can in response. Because we just learned that the certification decision on Vietnam is being dropped in Congress, so that there's no longer a reason that the administration will have to certify that Vietnam is doing what it can and cooperating as they should to unilaterally provide records. It was in there from 2001 until now, and we understand now it's being dropped.
Excuse me. Comment about North Korea. As of yesterday, quote unquote, North Korea is ready to re-engage on the POWM issue, and we didn't shut it down. North Korea, Ambassador Kim Young-gil, you shut it down in 2005, your country. So as far as getting back into North Korea, it's a U.S. decision. And that's the fact. You will never increase recovery remains and identifications if you do not have the personnel. I don't care how many buildings you put up, but if you want to find out for yourself, that I've been telling this committee for a long time now, go to Hawaii and talk to the personnel on the ground. You'll find out that a lot of what you're hearing supposedly being done, quote unquote, by Admiral Crisp is just a smokescreen. Nothing positive has come out of any of her recommendations. And I will go testify under oath to this. And if you go out to Hawaii, you will get the answers you need to make an intelligent decision.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Dr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Weissong. During the vote, I took your written testimony with me over to the floor, and I was intrigued by the comment about I'm not familiar with the U.S.-Russia Commission, and lo and behold, there was the speaker. And she was talking to someone, but her staff person was standing there, and I said, yeah, I'm going to give you, and I took along your written statement to Mr. Riley. You mentioned it also. And I opened the page and said, these folks just testified that there's an unfilled position here. And the staff member I talked to who's been around here for a while, he said, we have a list. She received a list of all the statutorily authorized appointments. And he says, this is not on that list. And he's going to look into it. It could be an oversight. And you think about it, elected officials love to appoint people. I mean, there's no reason for her not to do that. This would be these kinds of things mean something to her. So anyway, one of her staff members has your written statements, the two of you in his hand. And so when we get back from the spring recess, we can follow up on that. But he said, he seemed to be very familiar with it. He said, these are not, he said, I've seen the list, I have the list of appointments, and this is not on that list. So we'll follow up on that.
Thank you for that quick action, sir.
Oh, yeah, well, every once in a while. I just want to give just an open-ended question. Maybe we'll start with you, Mr. Boward. I would like for you each of you to tell us how you got involved in these issues, and what do you tell people about why this is still important? I mean, we think it's important, but I suspect you run into people in your friends back home who say, well, that's a long time ago. Why is this still important? I'd like to start with you, Mr. Bauer, about how you got involved in this and why this should be important to all Americans.
I got involved when I learned that there was such an organization, called CELHI. After the Korean War, we were told not to talk about MIAs. It might cause problems with Russia. I was with Marines in both North and South Korea that are missing. Some of them I was raised with, and it's been on my mind for many years, so that's how I got involved to try to do research and bring some of these. We're all very young at that time to bring them home, so that's how I got involved.
Thank you for this opportunity. I got involved in this issue when I guess it was around 1999, and my mother and my aunt both donated the mtDNA reference sample because my uncle obviously had not returned from the Korean War, and so I got involved in also the commemoration of the Korean War and went out, and I think that it's very important for all Americans to care and be concerned about all those that are still unaccounted for. For one thing, every day when they get up and they have all these freedoms, they need to remember that those people have given the ultimate sacrifice. They are not back home with their loved ones. And I would just like to see not just my uncle, but everybody be able to give all of their loved ones the type of a funeral that they are so deserving of. And also, we have to also remember that all those people that are out there serving right now and intend to serve in the future, that, how can we send them out if we're not doing what we always have promised, not to leave anybody behind? It is our obligation, it is our duty to account for every single person that is missing. Thank you.
Myself, 25 years ago, I was sitting in California, and I opened the paper, and there was a Vietnam demonstration to their credit advocating the POW-MIA issue. And I read the number, 2,200 and something, and I said, my God, there's over 8,000 from the Korean War. What's wrong with the Korean War MIAs? Where is anybody advocating? The following Monday, when I returned to New York, I picked up the phone, and the rest was history. And that's how I got involved. I'm a Korean War veteran. I have memories of carrying dead out of Korea that I've lived with for over 50 years, and I've been advocating for the Korean War MIAs. And if we don't do the right thing, it sends a message to our men in uniform. Hey, once you're gone, you're forgotten. And that's not what this country is supposed to be about. This issue actually was started in 1954 by government commitment to the men who died for this country. We owe them for their commitment and the ultimate sacrifice to do whatever we can to get the fullest possible accounting from all wars.
Ms. O'Shea?
I got involved, like many other people, in the late 60s and early 70s by buying a POW-MIA bracelet. And I drew the name, it was luck of the draw, of a young Army sergeant who had disappeared. And back then, in my naivete, I believed that he was, just one person. It was an isolated incident. And as I came to learn, he went missing with 3 other men, and I thought to myself, 2 other men, I'm sorry. And I thought to myself, how is it possible that the Army could lose track of 3 men at once? That's how naive I was. And I would come to learn that, whole teams and whole aircrafts would simply disappear with no evidence of what happened to these men. And I decided I was going to find out what happened to this particular individual, and I started researching. Eventually, I joined the National Alliance of Families when they formed, and I continued my research with them. We did learn, and my guy and his 3 teammates were recovered. They're resting at Arlington now. And in fact, it was 11 years ago this month that we came and buried them at Arlington. And that's something every family should have. It's a commitment we owe to every fighting man that we will bring them home. And I am sad and I am embarrassed to say it is a commitment our government has not lived up to. We see today that looking back, it would have been so easy after World War II to recover the men missing, especially in the South Pacific, because we're finding aircraft relatively easily and pretty often in the South Pacific. If we had taken a harder stance at Panmunjom and demanded our POWs, if we had taken a harder stance on the intelligence of POWs crossing into the former Soviet Union and China, perhaps we all wouldn't be sitting here today. A lot of the families would have the answers. They deserve the answers, and we're going to keep pushing at Congress. Sorry, but we're going to keep pushing, and we're going to be seeking the answers. We're seeking declassification because in spite of what you have heard, all the information is not declassified and available to the families. Thank you.
Thank you. I became involved in this doing research on my uncle. What I found out was my uncle was shot down, had burns on 90% of his body, taken POW, received beatings on top of that, and died in the prison camp weighing 80 pounds. After the war, his remains were placed on a C-47 with other POW bodies, and that C-47 went missing. With the POW bodies, however, what I found was a bigger picture that there were 78,000 men who had their own stories to tell. When I started going to the family update meetings, I was told, and I questioned, why is nothing being done for World War II? I was told I would have to form a family group if I wanted anything done. And that's what I did with other family members. A big problem World War II families have are our records are still classified. The X-Files are not open, although I found out we're now opening the X-Files. And World War II families have to do their own research, provide documentation to take to JPAC before anything can be done. We have to do our own research and provide the documentation, photos, and all of that before they'll even look at a case. And that shouldn't be the case. The family members should not be paying out of their pocket to fly over to another country to find their relative in order for Congress to do something to bring our men home. Thank you.
My brother's been missing in North Vietnam since September 21st, 1966. To be a member of our organization, that has to happen. I took over from my father, who was a former executive director, and after a couple of years, I've been executive director now since 1978, so over 30 years, and have been to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia countless times, and was a member of the interagency group, which I believe Mike or Phil one referred to, with a top secret clearance that was discontinued in 1993. So even though we probably won't ever get anything on my brother, I believe in this obligation, and I think the League's legacy is important to ensure that those who serve now and in the future have the absolute confidence that our government won't walk away from trying, though not everyone will ever be accounted for, and we all know that.
Well, we work for an organization that since 1919 has been concerned about taking care of our brethren. From a personal standpoint, I can tell you I can't imagine not having assurance in my mind that, in fact, my country is going to follow and take care of me, whether I'm dead or alive, having been in combat and thought about that. You're scared to death of becoming a POW, but you're also, your frame of mind, if you didn't think your country was going to get you back to your family one way or another, it's just unimaginable to me, and I think it would absolutely cut at the core of our ethic. And we're lucky that we have people that go out and do what they do, but this is a big part of it.
As a Vietnam veteran, this issue has always been important to me, but it really came to light back in the late 70s when Ann sent me a bumper sticker that said, "Hanoi, release our POWs, MIAs," and I really got involved in it. And since coming to Washington and working for the VFW, this has been an issue under my directorate. But the VFW has been concerned about our missing for many, many years. We have traveled, our national officers and Washington staff have traveled to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia every year since 1991 to press the governments, the host nations, for better cooperation and to allow us more access to their military archives to find the answers. Over the last 5 years, we have traveled to the PRC, the People's Republic of China, spoke with their ministers of defense, ministers of foreign affairs, to press upon their government for better cooperation. To Russia the last 5 years, to meet with their high-level government officials, to press upon them the importance of this issue and how important it is to the American people. And I believe the common thread here, why is this important? The common thread between all of us is the answers for the families, to bring closure to the families, okay, and to send the message, as I said in my oral, to the men and women serving today, that you will not be left behind.
Thank you all for your time. Thank you, Madam Chair, for your indulgence. Also, Mr. Weissong, it is reassuring as elected officials to know the power of a bumper sticker. So thank you all for your eloquence. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to, first of all, I'll apologize for not being here on time, but there were several other things that prevented me from doing so. But I'll tell you, and I don't fully understand what you or your family members or those that you represent, that the kind of trauma that it's only natural for people to have when they can't properly funeralize their loved ones for whatever reason. And I'm gaining a better understanding as many people here in Congress will continue to do, particularly as we hold these oversight hearings. And I'd like to point out to you, if it has not already been pointed out, that this is only the second hearing in the last 11 or 12 years, but and the other hearing took place in the 110th Congress, and we're now in the 111th. I'd say that there's some definite momentum here for there to be, there's already been a new look, and I appreciate the Chairwoman for bringing this up today, and I know that it will continue to be an issue. And as someone said, once you are gone, you are forgotten. I don't think that that's going to hold true in the future. And I don't know how many of Congress people have the missing in action flag up as you enter their office, along with the American flag, but there's quite a few, I believe, and my office is one. But I would like to think, that represents people on both sides of the aisle who are attuned to this issue, and so I'm sure that it'll get more coverage. I appreciate you all for keeping the issue alive, and because it's something that I'm sure the people who are directly affected, need advocacy so that we can bring them, and I hate to use this word because it's so overused, closure. So that's. I have no questions.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Kilroy.
Thank you, Chairwoman Davis, and thank you, members of the panel. I particularly want to thank those of you who have served in our military and served in our conflicts. I want you to know that we honor and respect your service, and I believe that we owe a debt as a nation to those who served and to their families. And we need to recognize that I think the families also sacrifice a great deal when loved ones are called up and when loved ones don't come home. That loss is excruciating. I am the daughter of a World War II vet who served in the Pacific Theater, who served in New Guinea. He came home, but his brother Leo did not come home. My grandmother didn't have any hope of having his remains returned. He was lost at sea. But I'm sure that would have meant a great deal to her if that would have been possible. And another uncle was a Korean-era veteran. And of course, I grew up in the time of the Vietnam War conflict. And, you know, my good buddy from a couple doors down was lost in action in Vietnam. And that had a very big impact on me as a teenager, high school student. So this is an important hearing today, and I thank the chairwoman for allowing me to participate, even though I am not a member of this committee. This is an issue that is important to us and to our country. And I listened very carefully to your testimony and to your answers to the question about how you got involved. And it seems to me that you were very concerned that each soldier got what we promised him as a nation, that those families got that respect that they were due to have their loved ones come home, and that it also meant something to soldiers currently serving, that we weren't going to leave them behind in a foreign conflict. So what it says to me is that regardless of conflict, that you believe and that each of you would be committed to trying to find and bring home the remains of our soldiers, and that would be a good reason not to have any particular divisions between which conflict somebody served in or was lost in. And so I was wondering if you had thoughts about the allocation of resources. You know, Ms. O'Shea referenced the planes that have been identified in the Pacific Theater from World War II. And that's recently something that has been brought to my attention because the remains of a resident and a service member from my 15th Congressional District, Second Lieutenant John Funk, who was a navigator aboard a C-87 aircraft in 1943 that disappeared in that dangerous area known as the Burma Hump, region between India and China. His plane was returning from airlifting supplies, equipment, and personnel to the Chinese government and allied forces after the mainland route to Burma was seized by the Japanese. These missions were certainly key to getting supplies to the coast and to helping our Pacific Theater operations. It was called the Forgotten Theater of World War II, and I want to make sure that these men are not forgotten now. So I was wondering, particularly since you made the comment about the planes that have been identified, you know, what we can do to expedite the investigation of those planes that were gone down and to bring home the remains of people like Second Lieutenant John Funk.
More funding and more staff. We need to have additional teams that are able to go out, not at the expense of another conflict, but rather to elevate all conflicts, all wars to the same level, the same priority, the same professionalism, and fund it so that you can have teams going out and recovering the World War II, the Korea losses. While North Korea, there is a problem. We all acknowledge that. There are many American servicemen resting in the grounds of South Korea. They need to be brought home. They need to be identified. We need a project of such massive proportion that will allow this mission to be accomplished. And I would also like to just add that while we are focusing on recovery and identification of remains, I would like to go back to my testimony and remind this committee that there are cases where the individuals survived their loss. There is intelligence that they were being moved to or at other locations, and searching for those individuals at lost locations, quite frankly, will be a waste of time. We have to determine who those men are. We know who some of them are, but we have to reinvestigate those cases and pursue new avenues with the governments that are accountable for these men.
Could I add to this?
Ms. Kilroy, I'm going to go ahead and let you, the rest of you, respond to that question. I wanted to ask that as well about the flexibility and changing the strategy that we have before us today. And so if a few of you want to comment on that, and then we're going to break for a vote, and we're going to take the next panel after that. So I just wanted to let you know if you wanted to weigh in on this question in terms of the strategy most recent first, which is up in terms of a discussion really of how we look at this strategy differently.
I think a couple of things that would help is new technology like the ground penetrating, radar, side scan sonar, and research. World War II, we have to do our own research. All the records are here in D.C. I don't know if you want to hire an independent group to help JPAC with that. You're going to have to fly someone from JPAC up here to look at records. It's kind of crazy. And even if DPMO looks at the research, you're not always sharing information. And we do need new technology, like the ground penetrating radar for the aircrafts that you're talking about being down, or side scan sonars of aircraft underwater. So I wanted to add that, and more research needs to be done.
I wonder if anybody wants to respond to a change in strategy quickly, because we're going to have to stop. But go ahead, Mr. Brower, I think you had to.
I don't know whether you'd call this a change in strategy, but there's new technology called radiograph matching that's terribly important. It's developed in January, and it's going to need funds for research and development. Currently, the JPAC budget does not have any funds for research and development. And I think that there's such possibility of identifying so many new or unknowns with this new radiograph matching technology that it's really going to need some attention, both for hiring forensic anthropologists and historians to work with this new technology, but they're going to need funding to develop the software.
What I wanted to say is quickly, and agreeing with the technology, there have been significant advances. What Ms. O'Shea said about people last known alive, those require investigations, and many of them were alive and on the ground. We have been talking in terms totally of remains today, which always distresses me, but it's one of the reasons that the Defense Intelligence Agency specialists that are investigators are so important to the Vietnam War effort. But I would point out, too, in terms of strategy and timing, it isn't just looking at remains recoveries from 50 and 60 years ago. In the Korean War, there were people last known alive that haven't come back, and in the Vietnam War. That is not true, obviously, on World War II. And yes, there are about 30,000 that went in sea. Maybe it's more. I don't know the exact numbers that are considered buried at sea. But there's a wide variety here, and each war needs to be addressed in its own circumstances, including investigations on people who were last known alive. And that's not to say they're all running around alive somewhere today. I'm saying those have been the highest priority of our government. Some of us differ with how serious it's been, but nevertheless, it has been a separate priority, and thus the focus on most recent wars because of last known alive cases being the priority, as they should be, I believe, in the Korean War as well.
If I may, I would just like to add to that our organization does believe that there were last known alive from the World War II. There is evidence in the Gulag study that was done by the Joint Commission Support Directorate, that is the investigative arm of the U.S.-Russian Joint Commission, that talks about that. As Ann said, we don't know that they're alive today, but certainly there is evidence that needs to be looked at, because if we're looking for those men at the lost locations, we're not going to find them.
Thank you. Ms. Bissy?
Yes, I would like to say that what I think is really important in the accounting process, and to move forward, we definitely need your support desperately on having our files declassified, even though there's a presidential order out to do so. This has not been done, and most recently, a research team from the Coalition of Families went to the National Archives and went through boxes where they had multiple slips that just the files had been taken out, and they were debriefing files, and no one has even looked at these files for over 15 years. We really need your help.
Thank you. I want to thank you all so much for your participation today. It's been very important for all of us to hear from you. And as I said, we do have your full testimony, but we certainly welcome any other written statement that you choose to give us, and to stay in touch and engaged as you certainly have been. And we hope to be very responsive to that. When we come back, we will have the second panel, and you're certainly all, of course, welcome to stay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.